Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa on the final workday of the week. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll make a quick run through all the key business news stories you need to know about from across Africa. Between Cairo, Johannesburg, Lagos and Nairobi, we've got you covered. Here's what's coming up. The South African president is on the spot over the misuse of public funds. The multinational firm SAP sinking $500 million into Africa, but where exactly is that money going? We'll tell you why you don't have to sleep under cucumbers to clear your wrinkles. Some interesting solutions are coming up in the beauty industry. Let's start with a question of commodities. Given the drought that is currently ravaging Minas Gerais, the heartland of Brazil's coffee industry, as it were, the world's biggest producer and exporter of that commodity has seen its coffee output decline. That, however, might be good news for one of Africa's biggest coffee producers, Ethiopia. Industry analysts say there will be a 25% rise in exports from the Eastern African country thanks to the drought in Brazil. Here's Girum Chala with more.
It looks like the year 2014-2015 is bright for the Ethiopian coffee farmers. The country's Arabica coffee export earnings have been forecast to climb 25%. That is about $900 million during that period. And that is due to a rise in price after drought-damaged plants in the biggest grower of the bean, Brazil. Since January, coffee Arabica has surged 71% in New York after drought hurt plantings in that country, Brazil. This has led to speculation that the consumption may outstrip supply. The Brazilian whose Camas plantation in Central America, Mexico, Peru struggle to recover from a crop disease called leaf rust that has cut yields across the region over the past 2 years. Ethiopia is Africa's biggest producer of coffee and the origin of coffee Arabica, and the country still solely depends on the export of the beans to support its economic growth. Ethiopia earned $719 million from the sales of the beans over the last 12 months. Grumtala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
On to South Africa now. The National Assembly has asked President Jacob Zuma to pay back the state some $23 million, which is spent in refurbishing his home. Normal proceedings in Parliament were brought to a screeching and very loud halt on Thursday after lawmakers from the Economic Freedom Fighters Party started to chant, "Pay back the money." Zuma was responding to questions in a usually calm parliamentary session about the controversial security upgrade to his residence in Nkandla. Now, those security upgrades came under heavy criticism in a report by the public protector, Thuli Madonsela, earlier this year in March. In it, she argued that President Zuma had, quote, benefited unduly from some of the upgrades, which included, bizarrely, a cattle enclosure and an amphitheatre. Zuma submitted his response to the report to Parliament last week, and a bipartisan committee of the National Assembly has now been set up to carry out a further review. Now, Nkandla Gate, as South Africans commonly refer to this event, raises questions about the extent to which South African government can be accountable and transparent. There's been a dearth of both fairly recently. Let's check in with Sumitra Naidu. She's in Johannesburg for us tonight. Let's start, Sumitra, with Mr. Malema's question to Mr. Zuma yesterday. When is he going to pay back taxpayers for money that was spent on upgrades that were really weren't necessary in the first place?
Well, Rama, the story first broke in 2012. Since then, there's been several attempts by the president and the ANC to justify the massive amounts of money that was spent on the Nkandla upgrades. There's also been a few investigations. The two that stood out was by the Public Works Department, which essentially cleared the president. And then there was the Public Protector's report, which found that from an initial budget of 207 million rand, in the end, it came to 246 million rand. And it was then recommended that the president pay some of this back, but the bulk of the extra spend would need to be paid back by the architect. So since 2012, there's been numerous responses, all of which were to justify the spend. So we heard about security concerns and therefore the upgrades, that the Nkandla residence is a national key point, the infamous fire pool, which was a safety measure. And then there was the matter of the president not knowing about the inflated costs. The public protector's report has largely been ignored, and in the president's latest response, he's now asked his new police minister to make a determination on the amount owing. Just looking at the past year's events, it looks like this is going to drag on for some time, and many are losing hope that any money will be paid back because the argument remains about whether he is guilty or not.
Indeed, but for a very long time, South Africa's government, as you pointed out, essentially tried to suppress or delay the release of information about the Nkandla upgrades, and public disclosure has been fairly hard to date. But given the stage at which the story is 2 years later, is it still difficult to get information about the scandal, the response to it, and of course whether or not the money will be paid back eventually?
Well, that's right. If you remember, the Public Works Minister refused to make his investigation into the matter public. And of course, the Public Protector said she was saddened by the responses and the lack thereof while conducting her investigation. There have been many attempts to keep information out of the public domain. However, the Public Protector did compile an extremely lengthy report on her investigation, very detailed on the Nkandla homestead, and that has become public information. I think the problem now lies in the response. There's growing anger among South Africans who are looking for accountability, but all they're getting at this stage is new investigations, new commissions, and very little in terms of timelines as to if and when the money will be paid back. It's probably why we are seeing a growing support for Julius Malema after his ranting in Parliament.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for that. That's CCTV Sumit Naidu there joining us from Johannesburg. Now, away from questions of transparency and accountability and the lack of it in South Africa, the country's president did meet with chief executives of top South African companies in Pretoria earlier today. It was all part of an initiative to improve the quality of education of South Africa's children. The CEOs are all members of the National Education Collaboration Trust. It's a body that aims to promote and strengthen collaboration between all stakeholders in education, including, of course, the government, business, labour and civil society. Renee Delkamp has more.
The National Education Collaboration Trust, which was established just over a year ago, is all about getting commitment from South Africa's boardrooms to help government provide better quality education in the country's classrooms. Addressing members of the NECT, President Jacob Zuma said a lot had been achieved in education in South Africa in a very short time. He said the country had built hundreds of state-of-the-art schools over the years, but more needed to be done. The NECT executive said around 500 million rands would be spent this year to roll out education projects in the 5 most needy provinces in the country. 300 million rands would come from government and 200 million from the private sector.
We have 85 of the largest companies in this country who are members of Business Leadership South Africa, who are part of the NECT, who are making not just financial contributions, which are really important, but are also making contributions in supplying skills. For instance, project management skills to support government in some of the programs that we are running already.
President Zuma commended the National Education Collaboration Trust for the work it had done so far. He said he was certain that more corporate players would join the initiative to keep on pushing back the frontiers of apartheid education. Renee Delkamp, CCTV, Pretoria.
The European multinational software company SAP plans to invest up to $500 million in Africa through to 2020. This is all part of efforts to expand its reach and revenues on the continent. It's the biggest maker of business management software on the planet. It says it will be focusing on financial services, energy, telcos, utilities and public sector clients. Now, investment in new skills is a key element of its 4-part 7-year plan. A development centre will also be opened in Pretoria that will make mobile applications specific to African clients and their needs. Let's reel in Melanie Ralph here from London for more on this story. Melanie, SMEs are the biggest employers right across sub-Saharan Africa. Where exactly do they fit into SAP's expansion plan?
It's certainly a key market, and one of the reasons for that is the growth potential. We're seeing massive growth in the mobile phone market, which in turn is feeding SMEs, which is an area SAP is intending to take advantage of. The company is investing $500 million in the region and says the country is unique because of its readiness to innovate. We saw that earlier this year when African leaders travelled to the US to look for and implement ideas to increase its growth. SAP is just one of the many companies looking to join what analysts describe as the Africa effect, and Africa could find itself at the forefront of technology as a result.
Indeed, there's also a fairly strong focus in SAP on 5 specific countries: Angola, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya and Morocco. Now, what exactly is SAP's value proposition here to the telcos, the financial firms, the utilities that it's targeting in those 5 countries?
Well, as I say, Africa might find themselves really at the forefront of technology in these areas, leapfrogging the developmental stages and head straight for the most advanced way of operating because of SAP's drive. The CEO says in the financial services area, they're planning to move the provision of services onto handheld devices. They're intending to make mobile applications, as you said, specific to Africa. And some reports say they want to remove all ATMs on the continent, replacing them with mobile phone-driven technology.
Indeed. However, with respect to Kenya, several banks here have heavily invested in their core banking systems in the last couple of years, upgrading some, extending their reach. So in that respect, isn't SAP a bit late to the party here?
Not necessarily. Analysts and world leaders have already flagged up Africa's growth potential, so there's still a lot of market share available. In terms of banking, that's one of the core markets where we've seen growth, a market SAP can itself take advantage of and build alongside. Jim O'Neill, who famously coined the BRIC acronym, has already flagged up parts of Africa as economies for future growth, economies that need investment, which is exactly what SAP is doing.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. That's Melanie Ralph live in London. Let's make a quick run through the equity markets here for you. Fairly interesting developments all around. However, the markets are closing the day a little lower across the board, except, however, for Kenya. That ended flat, down 0.07%. Not much developments on that front, but of course, the first half reporting season is petering out. When we come back, we'll be looking at the economic impact Ebola is having on the economies of West Africa. All that and more is coming up next. Africa is on the move. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies.
From small businesses to large-scale enterprises, hear directly from entrepreneurs behind the story. It's about putting you in the picture so you know where Africa fits in the global context.
Global Business, weekdays at this time on CCTV Africa.
African leaders have been urged to make it easier to move and do business across borders within the African continent.
Africans should be free to move in their continent, to do business, to interact, if we are to grow the levels of investment and trade that will ensure that we are able to create the jobs for our people that we require.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Business Africa from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Now, it really isn't any secret that Ebola has had a devastating effect on the economies of Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia. What is perhaps in question is just how bad the damage is. Now, the World Bank, for one, is predicting that the GDP growth in Guinea will fall from 4.5% to 3.5%. Liberia should expect a slowdown in transports and services. Other West African countries are also starting to feel the impact of the outbreak, which analysts say could cripple some of the region's most lucrative economies.
Life goes on in Lagos, one of Africa's most highly populated cities. Traffic is chock-a-block and the markets are filled with shoppers. But on many people's minds is the ongoing outbreak of the deadly Ebola virus. Nigeria confirmed 2 new cases of Ebola on Friday, raising the number of recorded cases in the country to 14.
It's difficult not to hug people or do things to people, so that's why it's scary, because you must have interactions with other people.
Nigeria has a better health system than the other West African countries, which are among the poorest in the world. The virus has struck hardest in countries with healthcare systems that are ill-equipped to cope with an epidemic. It has killed over 1,300 people. At the Lagos International Airport, travelers are screened as they come into the country as Nigeria races to stop the spread of the virus. Fears abound that if Ebola is not contained soon, it will begin to impact the African giant's economy.
Coming to Nigeria, it is an urban phenomenon and not a rural phenomenon. So the impact on Nigeria is not direct. The impact of Nigeria is more a knock-on effect, in the sense that if Nigeria is able to contain it, then the impact may not be as devastating as it is in those economies who are much more dependent on agricultural activities.
Ghana has also put measures in place to try and prevent an outbreak. Like Nigeria, staff at the international airport in Accra have been kitted with basic protective gear. Public awareness campaigns are being conducted regularly to teach the public how to recognize Ebola symptoms. But in markets across the city, bushmeat, a local delicacy, is still being sold.
I'm not too scared, but of course, I'm not also taking chances. Yes, I'm also being careful in case of, I'm taking precautions about those do's and don'ts.
It's not about Africa, it's not about West Africa. It's about the whole world. All of us should come together and then we'll see what we can do about it.
Economists say it's too early to estimate how much Ebola and its consequences will dent sub-Saharan Africa's economic growth, forecast by the International Monetary Fund at 5.5% this year, but damage seems inevitable. Mahia Mutua, CCTV.
Now then, cargo rail tariffs within the East African community are among the highest in the world. Not my words, but that's according to the 2014 East Africa Logistics Performance Survey. The authors of that report say the steep prices are a direct result of a lack of effective concession agreements as well as the inability of operators to improve their operational efficiency. Now, the study recommends that existing infrastructure owners and operators work on cutting costs as a whole. As a whole, the EAC's 5 member states need to invest in better road and rail infrastructure if they are to boost trade amongst themselves and cut costs to consumers in both time and money. Now, that exact same survey ranked Kenya poorly in terms of logistics efficiency among her EAC partners. Kenya was 4th, way behind Rwanda, Uganda and Tanzania as far as the performance of its logistics industry is concerned. Rwanda came first with a score of 3.52, Uganda was next with a score of just over 3, Tanzania 3rd, average score 2.89. Kenya and Burundi are ranked 4th and 5th respectively with scores of 2.82 and 2.78. Now, some of the indicators on which Kenya ranks quite poorly include the timely delivery of shipments, competence in the quality of logistics service, the percentage of cargo that's physically inspected, transparency in conducting customs valuations and dispute resolution. Uganda, in the meantime, is holding talks with China, seeking ways of boosting its overall agricultural output. Its agriculture minister says Uganda is in talks with China to allow more Chinese expatriates to set up agricultural projects in the country. She also says President Yoweri Museveni's government is ready to deepen trade ties with the Asian giant with a view to improving food security. She made those comments to a Chinese business delegation which now will make field visits to see what investment opportunities there are. Right, then a quick run through commodity prices. Not much of a difference from the trends we've been exploring in oil, coffee and cocoa this week. However, tangentially related to some of these information is the Esida port up in Libya. It's actually having its second tanker loading so far this week. Output is now up to about 600 or so thousand barrels of crude every day, but that's still significantly lower than the highs that we saw last year of 1.4 million barrels a day. Now then, we still have plenty more coming up. We'll be featuring a South African entrepreneur who's keeping women beautiful without the lengthy process of having to sleep with cucumbers in your eyes. All that and more is coming up next.
Biz Asia. Asia means business.
Welcome back. We're still watching Global Business Africa from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Now, it would be quite the understatement to say that the beauty industry is a multi-billion-dollar one right across the world. Women all over the world, including Africa, spend thousands of dollars every single year changing or improving their looks. Now, the demand therein from aesthetics, and that's makeup, artificial hair, other people's hair, implies there's quite a bit of strong demand here for investments in research and development. On Grassroots tonight, Sumitra Naidu has a story of one young entrepreneur who's applying quite a bit of scientific innovation to tackle the age-old problem of wrinkles.
Cucumbers, an old age tradition used to treat puffiness around the eyes, has become outdated in some parts of the world. Women now have a countless variety of products to choose from when taking care of those unwanted dark lines and wrinkles. But Karen Krauser-Neufeld believes she's developed an eye care product that's unique from the rest.
It's a solid gel that you place over the eye area. It's cold even without a fridge. It molds into the eye area contours, and it slowly releases moisture and active ingredients into the area around the eye.
The polymer gel, which forms the basis for the eye patches, was designed by the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa back in the 90s. The CSIR later abandoned its research and had no use for the gels. But Krauser-Neufeld did. She spent 10 years working with the liquid, conducting hundreds of experiments, and eventually developed the gel into a unique water-based treatment product. Despite the intense development that has gone into making these eye slices, they're pretty simple to use. They're made for the modern-day busy lifestyle, and they take just 5 minutes to work. They're also quite cost-effective, as each pair of gels costs just $20, and it can be reused up to 10 times. The gel pads are being used in over 800 beauty salons across South Africa. While the popularity around eye slices is growing in South Africa, demand for the product abroad is also growing. The eye gels are exported to several countries, including the United States and France, 2 countries where competition in the beauty industry is intense.
It's used for every single upsell, for every single treatment, as well as guests like to take it just to treat themselves at home. Everyone always worries about puffiness or dark circles on the eyes. It's great to put on the eyes just before you go out, so it is quite a big seller here.
But expansion into the rest of Africa is proving difficult.
So one of our biggest barriers to entry in the cosmetics sector is registration costs and paperwork. It can take up to a year, and in places like Nigeria costs $25,000 per product to just register your product. Finding the right partners is also difficult.
Barriers that Karen believes she will overcome in time. In the meantime, the eye slices business is generating over $500,000 a month in turnover. The company is now concentrating on building its brand and investing more into research development.
We'd also like to further develop our technology in the medical industry for burn wounds and dermal delivery systems for sports injuries, etc. So we're looking at that whole side of the development of the technology.
Sumitra Naidu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Right then, on to the currencies for you. 2 bits of news we're keeping a very close eye on for you, moving, of course, into next week. S&P and Fitch did essentially say they're not going to downgrade South Africa's top 4 banks in the same way Moody's did earlier in the week. That, of course, did lend some support to the South African rand. However, keep tabs on what comes out of Jackson Hole over in the United States. That might change the direction of the rand moving forward. In Ghana, however, different story. The first half budget deficit was 4.2% of GDP. Now, the target was 4.1, so you could argue that that Ghanaian authorities are more or less on track to actually maintain that particular full-year budget deficit of about 8.8%. You still have over 6 months to go on this, so we'll definitely keep tabs on that for you as far as Ghana's finances are concerned. And that's it for this edition of Global Business. Do send your feedback on the program to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. Check us out on Facebook and on Twitter. Constant updates. A flow of news does continue there 24/7. We'll see you over there. Thank you for watching. See you on Monday.